Welcome, everyone, to Sustained Impact for Coaches and Consultants Beyond Your Secret Sauce. We are so excited to have you here today. And today we have a special guest, founder and CEO of Goalster, Darren Webster. Hey, Darren, how are you?
Hi, nice to be back.
Yeah, nice to be back. Little awkward doing that intro in the beginning, huh? Before we were talking about birds, but we're going to get focused and we are going to be talking about what happens in the or after the workshop when coaches leave. So I think we saw that stat in the beginning. I don't know if Devin can pull that back up, but it mentioned that 95% of people are rating these trainings, workshops excellent after 30 days, but then after 180, 58% are right or marking them ineffective. So Darren, I want to get your thoughts on that. You talk to a lot of coaches and consultants. What are you hearing? Is it similar to this?
You know, it's interesting. We in the last probably 3 or 4 years that I've been at this, I looked at Google, and there's something like 2,000 or 3,000 meetings that I've had over the last couple of years, and specifically with coaches and consultants. And one of the things that I found consistently was there's an undercurrent of what happens after I do my stuff is a little bit out of their control. So whether it's the coaching sessions that someone has, or if I'm a consulting firm and I do training for an organization or for a company, once I do the thing that I do, it's when the coaches and consultants have the least impact afterwards. And when I saw that statistic, I saw it for the first time as we led into this, but essentially that sort of ineffective 180 days after that, you see the impact wane of the coach or the consultant, and that's just, pretty staggering number. But when I think back to some of the trainings that I went through at Verizon, there were some that were great trainings where I walked out of there thinking this was great stuff. I either had a different mindset after it, or I looked at things from a different perspective. That's good. But there were only a couple of trainings in my 15-year career that actually changed the way that I operated. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, is that it's one thing to put on a show or a performance of a great training or a great workshop. But if what you're teaching or what you're getting across in that session or that workshop doesn't sustain afterwards, then chances are you're not going to be rehired or renewed or anything like that. So in all the discussions that we'd had, there's this undertone of sustainability that is a real concern because of that lack of connection after the session or the workshop.
And I think when I was even at Verizon with you, right, we did, oh yeah, it's your cockatoo cup. We did so many trainings. And I remember, 7 habits of highly effective people. I remember presentation matters and a ton of these. And it was similar to what you said. We were so excited in the training and we absolutely loved it. We were talking about it, but then afterwards, it wasn't as top of mind. So, Darren, when you were in consulting, or I guess based on these conversations you've been having, what are typical methods they use to try to stay in contact after the workshop or the engagement?
Well, that's where the struggle is there's not a lot of tools that enable that. So let's say, for example, a coach is being hired by a client. What the coach or the consulting firm is there to do is to help someone achieve something. So you're being hired in to help them achieve a goal over here. And what you do here is important in setting them off on that journey, but making sure that they're doing the things that's required to be able to continue and sustain that journey is very difficult. Most, if you look at the coach's toolbox, so to speak, you've got Zoom calls as a way to have that direct connection. You can meet in person, but that's less likely these days because you don't always live near your clients, and companies are not bringing people together as much as they used to, perhaps. And so you've got to then bridge that divide somehow between the time that I can actually speak to someone and have a personal impact on them, which is not discounting the importance of that. That is, we're humans. That's a big part of it. But it's someone doing those things consistently afterwards that is what builds these habits. Or in the case of an organization, if you're working with even a small business, to rally that small business around those behaviors, get people to execute and to sustain that execution, long after the meeting or the training session is there's just no technology that allows them to do that. So what they have to resort to at this point is Excel spreadsheets to track particular engagements, or they'll have a website or some sort of place to house sort of static content, so that someone can pay for access to a program, have some sessions, and then they've got these resources that are out there.
Like videos and whatnot.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So, and even when we have customers who are going into large enterprises or small businesses and doing group trainings, it's a very common workplace or way for people to have that impact. But in those meetings, when you've got the sticky notes off the board and when there's a plan in place, is it memorialized? Is it something that people can keep looking at afterwards? Or is it something that sort of gets overwhelmed by the day-to-day running of the business or the pressures that are coming in? Do we really keep doing the things that we said we were going to do, or that we knew were good for us, when the business starts to get back in the way? And that used to happen all the time at Verizon. Once we get out of training, the first thing is, okay, now we're on to the next thing. And I got to believe that's part of the issue that coaches are facing. Their work with their client is sometimes secondary to the needs of that client's business, and that can impact things.
Yeah. So it's when we take it, we don't build it into, a part of our process. We're making it more of a box we check. And to your point, Darren, I've seen that so often. I remember at one of the companies I was at previous, they even had, it was just a laminated paper they would erase, and they would try to do that daily. And what would happen is this laminated paper would get put under tons of other papers, books, and no one acknowledged it until people walked around. So that makes a ton of sense. So when you're having these conversations and, people are telling you, we're using spreadsheets, we're using Excel, we're using laminated papers, what challenges are they having with that? I know not staying top of mind, but what are some other challenges maybe that we haven't thought of?
I think with the manual elements of it, there's time that needs to go into there. Someone else has got to fill something out. There's just, it's not a very repeatable, scalable way of doing it, but it's just sort of how people have had to operate. And by the way, this isn't just for the coaches, the sort of solopreneur, entrepreneur coaches. We have clients who've been in business for upwards of 80 years who are still leveraging what I would consider fairly, low tech solutions with their clients that require them to be there. And the whole point of really effective coaching is you can get your point across, launch someone into that good direction, but stay with them. And an Excel spreadsheet is not a way to stay with the customer or with your client. And if you've only got these couple of instances where you can stay connected to them, so if you think of a coach wanting to derive value to their client in the form of the sort of mason jar, the big rocks that fill up that jar are the workshops, the sessions that you're having with your client, and that's important for the value. But as you know, there's gaps in between there, and what fills in those gaps to keep someone moving towards that goal, and that's where we came up with Golster. But it's all born around the challenge of, when I do my thing, I've got to either hope mechanisms for accountability in place that my client or the sponsor of our coaching program within the company, for example, if they're not, following through with these things, then, it's just ultimately going to be result in maybe one-time business, and that's not good for anyone. So that's where we see the challenge. And even yesterday, I was on the phone with the CEO of a consulting firm, and I asked just a very simple question: what's the hardest part of doing what you do with clients? And I kid you not, the first answer was getting them to execute. And this is a firm that's already successful. They've already got major clients, but the problem still exists. What happens after we say or do the things that we do? Does it change the behavior? Does it change the results? And can we see that over time?
Yeah. And starting to think about that even a little further, right? So we're having these conversations, we're doing these weekly meetings, we're pointing people to these videos. But at the end of the day, if we're not right there with them, we're then relying on probably other managers, maybe individual contributors to carry our message. Is that typical, Darren?
With the firms, with individual coaching, there's probably two different groups here. The individual coaches, what we hear from them most is, By the time I get to the next session, my client is not necessarily prepared. They've had a bunch of other stuff that's going on in their world. They either delay it or we don't get to the core of the issue. And then once we follow up, we then go to the next conversation and then the next one until they stop. And that's what the problem is if there's inextricable linkage to you and the client to provide that value, and that you stay with them on that journey as a positive resource or a positive sort of force in that journey. That's what the coaches tell me that they need. For the consulting firms who go into small or large businesses, they've usually only got a couple of venues where they can have any impact. It's either going to be in a workshop where they get everyone together, or a summit, or something like that where it's face-to-face. For companies, that's hugely expensive and not always that easy logistically. And so when they do these programs, typically at the end of it, there'll be a survey. That is the really only way they can measure the effectiveness of that program. It's more the first stat in the one that you saw before. It's like 98% of people walk out of there and they're like pumped. This is great. But over the next 30, 60, 90, 120, 180 days, that dissipates, and it's just the way it is. And so the challenge for even the consulting firms is their executive sponsors sometimes don't even follow up on the things that they're paying the consultants to come in and do. It's a little bit weird. And that puts the consultant in a really tough position, because now I'm being paid for something, I'm not really getting the follow-up. So I'm appreciative for the business, but if you don't follow up, then nothing's going to happen here, and then I certainly won't get any more. And so that's it happens for all levels of consultants, whether it's the coaches or the big firms.
Yeah. So it makes sense, that after we do that workshop or that training, we need to stay top of mind, not just want to, but need to stay top of mind, and have people partnered in that organization to continue to do those follow-ups and continue to keep pushing kind of the message. But it would really, really help if you had that real-time insight into behavioral execution and what people are doing. And we can solve for that with tech, right? So when we look at tracking kind of those daily behaviors and executables, what would you say is the importance of tracking that daily, Darren?
Well, it's too easy to not do stuff, to give yourself a pass. That if you think about just from a health and wellness perspective, if I know that just getting up and going for a walk every day, or going for a jog is gonna help me and make me feel better and so on, provide all these benefits, that's great. But only will it provide those benefits if I do it. And sometimes you just don't feel like it. And I was an athlete. I was one of the most sort of engaged, goal-oriented people that I'd ever known. But there were days that I didn't want to go to practice. I didn't want to get out in the water. It was too cold. It was going to, it was going to be hard. But it's the people who stay disciplined to those behaviors, as opposed to only when they feel like it, or only initially, that break through and see that sort of success. And so if I'm working with a client, a coaching client, the session should really be about me having a personal impact, a human impact on this individual, how they think. Afterwards, it's what they do. And so if we set an objective for once we finish our session here, over the next week or over the next 2 weeks, we want to get to this point by doing these things. And if we can provide a roadmap to that client of not only what they need to do, when they should be doing it, and have some sort of method of accountability. So when we get to the next meeting, we can look back at those last 2 weeks and say, did we achieve the things that we wanted to achieve? If the answer is yes, and you can show that, and chances are we're going to have another couple of meetings. And that's where I think this starts, is having a good human connection with a client or with a company, being able to put in front of them a roadmap of what it's going to take to achieve the goal, and being able to follow up on that. And that's where consultants use the spreadsheets and so on. They're trying to do this, but the technology, I don't think, is at the level that I think clients need. That's why we still have the problem. If Excel spreadsheets and all that sort of stuff were good enough, we wouldn't have that stat that we just saw at the beginning.
Yeah, and I love the way you phrased that when you said the workshop or the engagement changes the way they think, but we still need to go and change kind of what they're doing, right? And that's huge. So when we start to, and I always think goals start first, but even if I look at some of my coaching friends, They link MyFitnessPal into the coaching, or for fitness, they link it into everything. So it's daily tracked. And then they even take different videos and everything and integrate everything into this coaching platform. So I have kind of daily feedback. So I definitely agree that that helps. And yeah, looking through this just a little bit further. So the importance of tracking the behaviors. Obviously, if we don't know what people are doing, we can't improve those, right? And then, so there.
Well, what'll end up happening is that someone's going to say, "Yeah, I'm doing them. Yeah, I'm good. I'm feeling great. But are they doing it?" And it was one of our partners actually. They deal with multinational companies. These are Fortune 50 type companies, and even they had to sort of at some point realize, or I guess accept and acknowledge that we might get a chance to show up to a couple of staff meetings after we do our thing, but really the impact is at the front end. It's how you break through that barrier of getting the sponsors to sort of have you come into their business, and to be able to work with them in true partnership over the long term. That I think is on the consultant side, something that I think is a big opportunity. To be able to go to a big company or an executive within a firm and say, not only can I do this session that's going to set you guys up for success, but we have a long-term plan that keeps you accountable to it. That, I think, is a part of the differentiation of sustainability, is being able to say, because everyone's got a secret sauce. Everyone's got something that they do. Every person that I've spoken to, all accomplished professionals, decades of experience, they've got their thing that they're really good at. But once that thing is done, it's got to sustain, and that's where that really is the core problem that we hear consistently. Whether it's I need to sustain my coaching sessions with my coach, with my client, because otherwise I have no business, or when we go into a company, we've got to have so much impact that and try and get recurring revenue for years with this next company, so that we are inextricably linked to their success. We're deeply intertwined with the relationships, and we have a venue to continue to come back to them and show value month in and month out. A lot of times for consultants, they just don't have that. They've got their initial workshop. If they nail it, they might get another one. If they don't, it's a one-off. And that's not the kind of business that I wanted to build anyway. So that's where I think the challenges continue.
Yeah. So when you solve for that accountability piece and have built something that's long-term, and you change behaviors long-term for coaches, you're not just solving for having effective coaching, but you're also starting to do things like get repeat business. Is that what you were saying, Darren?
Yeah, well, I'd love to see a few. There's not a lot of stats on client retention, but if you think about even the really ominous stats for coaches, that 30% of coaches within a year are going to be out of business. That tells you alone that the sort of the current structure of coaching interactions, as good as they are, they're just not enough, and they're not enough to create that sustained change and that deepened relationship. So unless you nail those first few sessions, chances are it'll drop off over time, and that's something that we know happens, and then it's validated by the data that you just saw. So how then do you, as a coach, set something up that is immediately long-term, that keeps you connected in a way that adds value at multiple touch points to the client? And if your only options are the one-on-one sessions, or the newsletter that I send, or the content that I've got on Kajabi or something like that, like, it's just not going to do it. To be able to create a recurring revenue business, which is the utopia of any consulting firm or coach, is how do I know that every month I've got a certain amount of money coming in before I do anything? It's because you've got something that's recurring, and because there's that technological gap, there is no real platform that allows a coach to be able to monetize their services in a way that they can control the delivery of them, and that they own the long-term relationship.
Mm-hmm. And thinking back to my own experience, even, I don't know that I've ever had a repeat consultant. I'm trying to think back to someone I've seen maybe twice or more, but I'm realizing that a lot of it was done at things like SKOs, and we got really excited about it, talked about it in some smaller groups, maybe carried it away, like you said, up to 30 days, but I don't think I've ever seen someone second. So that's really interesting.
It's well, it's also just because it's the nature of it. Like, you don't always need a consultant, so there's not always that continual need. But also, if I'm hiring a consultant, I'm generally hiring them for one thing to help me achieve one goal, and unless that consultant can go beyond that service into other services that add value, it's sort of, destined to be a bit of a one-off there. For the coaches, though, what I think is the opportunity is to not just coach the individual, but to help that individual and their own team achieve the results that they want as well. So going beyond that one-to-one coaching is one way of not being part of the 30% of coaches that will be out of business. And again, it just doesn't happen that easily. It can't just be about the relationships, because even the consulting firms that have these Fortune 50 companies as their customers, what generally is the factor that keeps them right now is the relationship personally. But what happens if that person loses their job or gets moved into another division that doesn't have the budget that now you are relying on with your relationship, or your coach, the coaching client that you have, has some unexpected thing going on in their life and they've got to put your stuff on hold? That's not a very sustainable, and it's just sort of a higher risk business. And so anything that you can do, or anything that a coach or a consulting firm can do to go beyond their current secret sauce, integrate themselves with technology. With technology into their clients, so they've got that longer term connection. That to me is the way to break out of what I feel is an unscalable business model.
Yeah, completely agreed. And I know we try not to talk about Goldster too much in here, but it was the first time I really got to sit down and think about it through a coach's mindset. So what I mean by that is, obviously when we sit down and we decide what we're going to work on, we have a starting point and an end goal. But really focusing on, those bite-sized pieces and those milestones, and trust, but verifying that everyone is doing that. I think this is a tool as a coach that probably would have helped my team excel a little bit faster, in every aspect.
Yeah, well, where it all came from. I'm an athlete originally. I was a world championship level sprint kayaker and part of the Australian Institute of Sport and so on. And part of, even in athletics, you've got to do the work. It's one thing to set a goal. I want to go to the Olympics, or I want to represent my country, but someone's got to go to the gym. Someone's got to get out on the water. Now, I had a coach, and in fact, I had a series of coaches that their sole purpose in life was to ensure that we were at peak performance for the national championships, the Olympic trials, those sorts of things. And so, yeah, they showed up. They had to be there. They were part of the process. But there were things that they made us do that we had to be accountable for, our gym sessions when they weren't there. And so even the technology they had at the Australian Institute of Sport was not good enough to be that sort of coach in the pocket that I wanted Goldster to be. When I was an executive at Verizon, when we were working together there, if we wanted 1,200 people to all of a sudden rally around a big objective, it's not enough just to say, hey, we're going to go do this. Someone's got to do stuff. Someone's got to achieve things. Someone's got to execute something with a level of consistency and at a high enough standard that's going to deliver that result. Because just setting the goal at the beginning of the session is one thing, or the beginning of the webinar, but doing the work to get there requires so much more. And over that sustained period of time, your interest levels, your desire, even as an athlete, like sometimes I just didn't feel like it, but you got to. And it's the people who are disciplined and who continue to do the work, even though it's a little bit difficult, they're the ones that are going to see the results. And the coaches who enable that sort of relationship are the ones that are going to see the repeat business, because what they're doing is continually providing value that someone can see, not only ingest and feel and get in the relationship, but that they're doing stuff that is producing the results that they wanted to produce in the first place. That's why they hired you. So help make it easy for them to visualize their success, get to it, and be accountable for what they need to do to make it.
Mm-hmm. So we're helping them visualize the success, and we're showing them exactly how to get there, and then coaching them along the way. I mean, I really don't think there is a better way to stay top of mind. Darren, I think we have just a few minutes left. Is there, any other tips, tricks, or anything else you want to share with our audience before we go?
No, it's just, as I think back on all these discussions that I've had, every single one of the people that I've spoken to has had their own unique thing that makes them really interesting. The problem is that everyone has that. everyone's got the experience and that's what they have to go to market with. And so differentiating in that realm is really hard when everyone's saying that their stuff is the best. And so how do you go to a potential client, or whether it's a coaching client or an SMB or an enterprise client, and say something very different? Not only will I be able to do this based on my experience and we'll have a great time at the workshop or what have you, but we're going to do something that you haven't seen. And we're going to be on the journey with you for the next 12 months. What all of these conversations have led me to believe is that this is the missing link that that coaches and consultants have just not solved for, is what happens afterwards. And if there's Excel spreadsheets and so on that are the tools for success there, it's not going to help you bridge the gap. And what we intended out of our own frustrations and pains in this process of being a coach and a consultant is we delivered a platform that would help us break out of that. And so we've seen the benefit of it, and we want to make sure that for those coaches who are out there struggling every day, and we know the struggle of getting new clients and then retaining them, it's difficult. And so if you don't have the technology to be able to sustain that or to scale that impact, you're still on this sort of hamster wheel. And that's where I have a personal sort of element of this, because I sat in this chair thinking to myself, if I don't have technology that allows us to scale, then I'll be one of those 30%. And I'm a former executive at Verizon. I have all this experience, but that's the sort of the game at this point. And so you've got to differentiate through your secret sauce, of course. You've got to be credible, but you've got to be able to do more. And those who can demonstrate that they can deliver more value for a longer period of time and sustain those results are the ones that are going to get the business.
Makes a ton of sense. And thank you so much, Darren, for joining me today. And thank you everyone for attending. And we hope to see you soon. If you have any questions or want to chat any further about some of the improvements we can make in coaching and consulting, team up with one of us. We're happy to help you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.